Hi, Scott Orlin with CINEMA-Magazin. The new film was called 1917, and it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for this man right here, director and writer Sam Mendes. You know, if there's a lesson to be learned from this film, listen to your ancestors, listen to your grandparents. Of all the stories your grandfather told, why was this one the one that resonated?
Well, actually, this is an amalgam, this movie, and this has many of little fragments of the stories he told us, but really it's its own story. But what resonated with me when I was a very young kid, my granddad told me stories of fighting in the war, the Great War, at the age of 17, was how tenuous life was and how slender the line between him staying alive and his friends dying. But he told me some amazing fragments, and one of them was about carrying a message across no man's land. And that became the little acorn that stayed with me. And eventually, when it came time, I felt to write my own movie, which, having made 7 or 8 movies, this is the first time I'd actually put pen to paper. That was the story I wanted to tell. So I hope his spirit remains alive in the movie.
What's fascinating is everybody's talking about that this is, the look of the film is one shot. It's all the way through. And talking to some of your actors, though, what I don't think people realize is to get that one shot, you kind of walk them through first and then built the set around the pacing of that. Talk a little bit how that process.
That's very well put, Scott. You've done it better than I do. I always struggle to try and express how complicated that is. Yeah, you walk them through it and you construct the set for the length of the scene. You know, so what you're doing is, if let's say you've got a little scene there where they're walking through an abandoned orchard, at the length of the dialogue, you walk down an empty hillside and you rehearse the scene and rehearse it until you get the rhythm exactly right. And then you mark the beginning of the scene and you mark the end of the scene, and then you build the orchard and then you build the wall around it. So you're going backwards. So you're constructing a landscape to fit the scene. Because obviously, if your orchard is too short, then they run out of land and they're out of the orchard before the end of the scene. And if it's too long, the dialogue runs out and they're going to keep walking in silence. And because we can't cut, everything has to be continuous. So that, and now magnify that by 100 across quarries, woods, hillsides, farmhouses, canals, ruined towns, rivers, forests and trenches, and you get 1917, which is, a real journey in real time, and therefore you have to construct the journey exactly as these boys take it.
Obviously, over the course of our cinematic lives, we've seen a lot of movies that have taken place during the concepts of war, whatever war that might be over time. So what was your approach, per se? Because this isn't really a war film at all. It's not about us versus them.
No.
It's about these two guys just trying to make sense of this assignment.
It's really well put. I think that it's not a war movie in the sense that it's not a combat movie. There is combat in it, but it's not about bloodshed. What I was trying to do was look through a tiny keyhole of one man's experience into a vast panorama of death and destruction.
And you put him through a lot.
Yes, George was put through a lot. But, he is a heroic young man in his nature. He's a very brave, very unostentatious, very unshowy, and very like the character, quiet, internal, but with some great old-fashioned virtues, dignity, and heroism, actually. So he was my ally in this, as was Dean Charles Chapman, who played Blake. And I think that for me, what you're wanting is something that has a sort of pull, that pulls you forward, like a dream, but with the stakes of reality. And a sense of ticking clock behind it the whole time. But you're also wanting to go through different environments. The last thing I wanted to do was make a kind of brown movie that was just mud and destruction. But at this point in 1917, suddenly the Germans retreated to the Hindenburg Line, and this land that had been fought over for years by the British was empty. And so this movie travels through orchards and farmhouses and canals and rivers and cities, and that is the ever-evolving landscape of the film. And one of the things I'm, I suppose, proudest of is that you have to know nothing about the First World War to watch this film. It's simply a date, and then you meet these two men, and you live these 2 hours with them. And in that respect, I hope it's accessible to all, and it's certainly a contemporary take on a historical period, rather than just a period film, if you know what I mean.
It was an incredible cinematic experience. Thank you for sharing, Sam Mendes.
Thank you, Scott.
And this is Scott Orlin. Till next time.